wind howled through the trees, a mournful wail that echoed across the snow-covered landscape. I stood at the edge of the forest, gazing up at the dark, ominous mountains looming in the distance. The icy air bit at my cheeks, and my breath formed ghostly clouds in the frigid night. I tightened my grip on the camera slung around my neck, the weight of my mission pressing heavily on my shoulders. I had come to the Ural Mountains in search of answers, driven by an obsession that had consumed me for years. The Dyatlov Pass Incident had always been shrouded in mystery, a tragic enigma that had claimed the lives of 9 experienced hikers in 1959. Their bodies had been found scattered across the snow, their injuries bizarre and inexplicable. The official report had blamed an unknown compelling force, but no one had ever been able to explain what had truly happened on that desolate slope. As a journalist, I had spent years digging into the case, poring over old reports, interviewing survivors, and piecing together the fragments of the hikers' final days. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality of standing in the very place where they had met their untimely end. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, as if the land itself remembered the horrors that had unfolded here. I set up camp at the base of the mountain, my tent a small island of warmth in the vast frozen wilderness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the landscape into darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The trees seemed to close in around me, their skeletal branches whispering secrets in the night. I tried to ignore the unease gnawing at my gut and focused on my notes, reviewing the details of the hikers' last known movements. It had started innocently enough, a group of friends embarking on a challenging trek through the mountains, eager for adventure and camaraderie. They had documented their journey in photographs and diaries, capturing moments of laughter and struggle. But somewhere along the way, something had gone terribly wrong. Their final campsite had been discovered in a state of chaos, the tent slashed open from the inside, belongings strewn about as if in a frantic escape. Some of the bodies were found partially undressed, a sign of paradoxical undressing due to hypothermia. Others bore strange, unexplained injuries, crushed ribs, fractured skulls, and radiation burns. I lay awake in my sleeping bag, the events of that fateful night playing over and over in my mind. What could have driven the hikers to such desperate measures? What had they seen or heard that had filled them with such terror? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden chilling scream that pierced the silence. I bolted upright, heart pounding, straining to hear through the thick canvas of the tent. The scream came again, a high-pitched wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled out into the darkness, the beam cutting through the swirling snow. The wind howled around me, carrying with it an eerie, disembodied laughter. My breath caught in my throat as I saw a figure in the distance, silhouetted against the moonlit snow. I hesitated for a moment, fear rooting me to the spot. But my curiosity and my duty as a journalist propelled me forward. I trudged through the snow, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I drew closer, the figure came into sharper focus. It was a woman, her hair wild and tangled, her eyes wide with terror. She seemed to be running, but her movements were jerky and unnatural, as if she were being pulled by invisible strings. "Hey!" I called out, my voice swallowed by the wind. "Are you all right?" The woman turned to face me, and I froze. Her eyes were empty voids, black holes that seemed to swallow the light. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, a torrent of snow and ice erupted from her lips, engulfing me in a blinding white storm. I staggered back, gasping for breath, and when I looked up again, she was gone. Shaken, I stumbled back to my camp, my mind racing. Had I just seen a ghost? A hallucination brought on by the cold and exhaustion? I didn't have time to ponder the question as another scream rang out, this time much closer. I swung the flashlight around, the beam catching movement at the edge of the forest. I moved cautiously toward the sound, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I had come too far to give up now. As I approached the trees, I saw a flicker of light, a campfire burning brightly in the distance. My heart leapt with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Perhaps there were other hikers out here, people who could help me make sense of what I had just experienced. I pushed through the underbrush, the branches clawing at my clothes, and emerged into a small clearing. The campfire crackled merrily, casting long, dancing shadows across the snow. Around it sat a group of figures, their faces obscured by the flickering flames. I called out to them, but my voice seemed to die in the air, swallowed by the oppressive silence. One of the figures stood and turned towards me, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was one of the hikers from the Dyatlov group, his face twisted in an expression of pure terror. His mouth moved soundlessly, eyes pleading for help. I took a step forward, but the ground beneath me gave way, and I plunged into darkness. I landed hard on a bed of ice, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. Gasping, I looked around and realized I was in an underground cavern, the walls glistening with frost. The air was frigid, each breath burning my throat. I scrambled to my feet, the echo of my fall reverberating through the chamber. A faint light glowed at the far end of the cavern, and I moved towards it, desperate for warmth and an exit. As I approached, the light grew brighter, revealing a figure standing in its glow. It was a man dressed in old-fashioned hiking gear, his face obscured by a hood. He turned to face me, and I saw that his eyes were the same empty voids as the woman's. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice a rasping echo. "This place is cursed. It holds the secrets of the dead, and it will not let you leave." Before I could respond, the cavern began to shake, the ice cracking and groaning underfoot. The man vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. I turned to flee, but the ground split open, and I fell into the abyss below. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I awoke, I was lying in the snow at the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. My body ached, and my mind was a whirl of confusion and fear. Had it all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by the cold and isolation? But as I sat up, I saw something glinting in the snow beside me. It was a small, rusted compass, one that had belonged to one of the Dyatlov hikers. My heart raced as I picked it up, the weight of it grounding me in reality. Whatever had happened in that cavern, it was real, and it was far from over. I had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. The answers were out there, buried in the snow and shadows of the Dyatlov Pass, and I would uncover them, even if it meant facing the same unknown terror that had claimed the lives of those 9 hikers. The rising sun cast a pale, ghostly light over the snow-covered landscape, but it did little to dispel the darkness that had taken root in my mind. Clutching the rusted compass, I stood and scanned my surroundings. The forest loomed behind me, its trees seeming to whisper secrets I was not meant to hear. Ahead lay the slope leading up to the pass, a silent, unyielding sentinel guarding the mysteries that had drawn me here. Determined to uncover the truth, I packed up my camp and began the arduous climb. The cold bit at my face and fingers, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins kept me moving. I followed the path the hikers had taken all those years ago, the weight of their unseen presence pressing heavily on my shoulders. As I ascended, the wind picked up, its mournful wail echoing the screams I had heard the night before. Hours passed and the sun was high in the sky by the time I reached the site of the hikers' final campsite. The remnants of their tent lay buried beneath a thick layer of snow, the only evidence of their presence a few scattered items. A torn jacket, a rusted canteen, and a notebook, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. I knelt in the snow, carefully opening the notebook, my heart pounding as I read the final, desperate entries. "We saw something in the woods last night," one entry read. "A figure watching us from the shadows. Yuri says it's just our imagination, but I can feel its eyes on us, even now." Another entry, written in a trembling hand, spoke of strange lights in the sky and an overwhelming sense of dread. The final entry was barely legible, the words scrawled in frantic haste. "It's here. We can't escape. God help us." As I closed the notebook, a shiver ran down my spine. Whatever had haunted the hikers was still here, lurking in the shadows, watching my every move. The realization filled me with a mixture of fear and determination. I had to find out what had driven them to such terror, even if it meant facing the same fate. I spent the next few hours searching the area, my senses on high alert. The snow crunched beneath my boots and every snap of a twig set my heart racing. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the pass, I stumbled upon a cave entrance partially hidden by a drift of snow. The air around it was unnaturally cold, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. I hesitated, the darkness within the cave seeming to beckon and repel me in equal measure. Taking a deep breath, I switched on my flashlight and stepped inside, the beam cutting through the thick, oppressive gloom. The walls were covered in strange, unearthly symbols, their meaning lost to time. The deeper I ventured, the more I felt as if I were being watched, an unseen presence pressing down on me from all sides. The passageway widened into a large cavern, and there in the center lay the remnants of a campfire. Around it were the bones of the hikers, their skeletal forms twisted in eternal agony. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I was standing in their final resting place, the very heart of the mystery I had come to unravel. As I knelt to examine the bones, a sudden gust of wind extinguished my flashlight, plunging the cavern into darkness. Panic surged through me, but before I could react, the air was filled with a low, guttural growl. I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers numb with fear, and managed to switch it back on just as a figure stepped out of the shadows. It was the same man I had seen in my vision, his eyes empty voids, his face twisted in a rictus of terror. He moved towards me with jerky, unnatural movements, as if being pulled by invisible strings. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest, but he continued to advance, his mouth opening in a silent scream. Desperation took hold, and I swung the flashlight at him, but it passed through his form as if he were made of smoke. The growl grew louder, reverberating through the cavern, and I realized with dawning horror that it was coming from the very walls themselves. The symbols carved into the stone seemed to pulse and writhe, coming to life before my eyes. Suddenly, the man stopped and pointed to a spot on the ground. Trembling, I directed my flashlight to where he indicated and saw a small, intricately carved box half buried in the snow. I picked it up, the wood cold and smooth against my skin, and felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The box seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy, and I knew instinctively that it held the key to the mystery of the Dyatlov Pass. The growling intensified, and the walls began to close in around me. I had to get out, but I couldn't leave without uncovering the truth. Clutching the box, I turned and fled the cavern, the spectral figure's eyes burning into my back. The passageway seemed to stretch on forever, but I finally burst out into the open air, the bitter cold a welcome relief from the oppressive darkness. I ran down the slope, not daring to look back until I reached the relative safety of the forest. Panting and exhausted, I collapsed against a tree and examined the box. It was covered in the same strange symbols as the cavern walls, and a sense of dread washed over me as I realized I had uncovered something far more dangerous than I had anticipated. With shaking hands, I opened the box. Inside was a small, weathered journal, its pages filled with cryptic notes and sketches. As I read through the journal, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The hikers had stumbled upon an ancient, malevolent force that had lain dormant for centuries. The symbols were a form of binding magic, designed to contain the entity and prevent it from escaping into the world. But the hikers had unknowingly broken the seal, releasing the entity and sealing their own fates in the process. The journal's final entry was a warning, a desperate plea to anyone who might find it. Do not come here. Do not disturb the darkness. It will consume you just as it consumed us. The wind howled around me, and I felt the weight of the entity's presence pressing down on me. I had to leave, to escape before it was too late. But as I turned to go, I saw the figures of the hikers standing at the edge of the forest, their eyes empty voids, their mouths open in silent screams. I realized with dawning horror that I was trapped, just as they had been. The entity would not let me leave. It would consume me, just as it had consumed them. The darkness closed in around me, and I felt the icy fingers of the entity wrapping around my soul. My vision dimmed, and the last thing I saw was the ghostly figures of the hikers, their faces twisted in eternal agony. The Dyatlov Pass had claimed another victim, its secrets buried in the snow and shadows, never to be uncovered.